Hi everyone. Over the years, I have developed more than a few ideas and techniques for ways to make Valentine's treats for friends and for my galentines, even when I didn't have a Valentine. And you do not need to have a mold that's in the shape of a heart. There are a ton of ways to incorporate a Valentine's theme into pieces. And my favorite way is to cut a piece of paper, something pretty, something sparkly, and add it to just any old mold. I'm making an oversized coaster here for one of my best girlfriends because she has the largest cup of coffee that I've ever seen anyone use. So I'm taking advantage of the size of this mold, and I'm going to add paper that I actually make myself, but any paper would do, even just red construction paper. Paper is such an underutilized thing in resin, at least that I've seen, and I absolutely adore paper and paper crafting. So I happen to make this product and I sell it in my Etsy shop, but this technique can be done with anything. You could use construction paper that you color with markers. You could paint something. I mean, cutting out the shape of a heart, I use my Cricut for it, but really, this is so easy. So there are a ton of ways to add a heart feature to something. And I just know that my friend is going to feel so special every time that she drinks her coffee, and she's reminded of how wonderful our friendship is. So I'm using craft resin, and I prepped it by making sure it was 95 degrees before I measured out A and B equally by volume. And then I mixed it for 7 minutes and I let it sit for 10. And I really like for my resin to hit 110 degrees before I do anything to it. And I have a temperature gun that I test this with. So there are many other videos on Craft Resin YouTube that explain this process and that show other artists, in addition to me, the different tools that they use to check the temperature and such things. So when my resin was ready, I poured it into the mold, and there weren't any bubbles. It was ready to go. That's why I wait till 110. I then added a few drops of silicone oil, and I added white piñata. And you see the white piñata is separating on top of the resin. That is because of the silicone, and it is this wonderful marble technique that there are also a bunch of different videos on this technique on the Craft Resin YouTube, because we're all just wildly excited about this marble technique. And I like doing it in a bunch of different colors in a bunch of different ways. And I thought that this would be really interesting and add nice dimension so that the heart wasn't quite so stark. I wanted it to feel softened. So I wanted there to be kind of a feathery effect, which this absolutely created. So when you embed anything in resin, paper, I really prefer something that has a little bit of rigidity to it. Similar rigidity to maybe tinfoil, maybe more rigid than that. I feel like it's easier to make sure that it goes all the way to the bottom if there's no bubbles in it. So I typically really try to choose things to embed that have that certain amount of rigidity that I'll feel confident that there aren't any bubbles underneath. So the way that I lay these in is I start with one end, especially if there's a point, and I lower the point in, and then I move it slowly across the bottom of the mold to the bottom edge of the mold. Then I slowly push down the rest of the piece that's being embedded to release any air bubbles as it's moving forward, because I don't want air bubbles to get trapped underneath it. So I want it to go in at an angle and the air bubbles be able to release up to the part that has not been embedded yet. And then once you get up to where you're going to embed the whole thing, I push it down with my stick all the way to the bottom of the mold, and I make really sure that it has contacted the bottom of the mold everywhere, so that there's really no chance of bubbles. It didn't have bubbles going in, and now it's full contact with the bottom of the mold. And there's a fair amount of resistance. If you try and move it around with your stick, it's made some bit of suction with the bottom silicone, so you can tell if there are air pockets. I added a couple drops of alcohol. I don't want to spray this with alcohol because I don't want it to disperse the alcohol ink. I really want the alcohol ink to pretty much stay where it is, but I did want just a tad bit more movement. So I used just a couple drops of alcohol ink, and then I moved it around physically so that it would disperse it just ever so slightly. And I feel really good about the results, so I'm going to leave this and let it cure. So I'm making this piece with craft resin for a wide variety of reasons. First and foremost, it's heat resistant, and that's going to be really important since she's going to have a hot cup of coffee on this. Also, since I'm embedding an item that has a lot of bends in it, it might be really tricky to get the bubbles out from underneath it if I was using something else. If you have any ideas for things that would be fun to embed into resin, or things that you might like to see me try, please be sure and leave that in the comments. We are so happy that you're here, and we're really interested to know what you'd be interested in seeing. And I've tried lots of things, and I would be happy to share those with you.